Hello. I'm going to make a recording with some pictures and things about my history, my work history. I worked for the government for 35 years and then I retired. Upon graduating from high school in 1973, I joined the Navy for 4 years. Here's a picture of the electronics technicians Class A school at Great Lakes, Illinois. And here's a picture of the ship that I was assigned to eventually. The USS Spruance, DD-963. Pause. Upon graduating at number 3 in the Navy school, electronics school, I requested anything on the East Coast, but they sent me to the West Coast to work on the big radios at the Dixon Transmitting Facility near Sacramento, California. After 2 years, I managed to get a no-cost swap back to Virginia, and I spent my last year in the Navy aboard a new ship, DD-963, the Spruance, which was decommissioned and sunk for target practice in 2005. Our government is so wasteful. I'm now showing you a picture of the first radio that I worked on when I was in the Navy in 1973, an FRT-40, a 40,000 watt shortwave radio transmitter. You can transmit around the world with it by skip if you hit the ionosphere right. It was 4 to 30 megahertz shortwave. That's below the FM band and above the AM band. This radio was not solid state. It had 122 vacuum tubes. It was a really good radio. I loved working on that radio. Now I'm going to show you a picture of the most powerful radio I ever worked on, a 100,000 watt, very low frequency radio, the FRT-72. It was also a tube type radio. VLF stands for very low frequency. This 100,000 watt transmitter talks to the submarines underneath the water during the Cold War. It can be picked up under the water. The frequency was around 17 kilohertz, if my memory serves me right. That's an audio frequency, but it was our radio frequency that's being transmitted. Anyway, I fixed that once or twice. They normally had a civilian that worked on that, but I remember one time he was not there and it broke down and I had to fix it, and I got a little award for fixing that thing because it was very important to the people there to keep track of those submarines during the Cold War. The next picture I'm going to show you is an SRC-20. It was a radio that I worked on in Virginia, and I also worked on the ship that I was on. It's an aircraft it's an aircraft radio. It's to talk to the airplanes. It's not on an airplane. It's on the ship or on the shore station. I maintained 21 of those radios on second shift at the Fleet Combat Direction Systems Training Center in Dam Neck, Virginia. I was there for 1 year, and I spent my last year in the Navy on sea duty out of Norfolk, Virginia. When I was discharged from the Navy, I went to college for a year, and then I dropped out and went to work for the U.S. Army as a civilian electronics worker. And I'll show you that little picture looking down at Building 370 where I worked, and all those cars in the parking lot. One of those might have been mine. I can't guarantee it, I don't know when that picture was taken. My Army experience was from 1979 to 2008 when I retired. I worked mostly on Hawk and Patriot radars parts and repairs for them, but I also went out in the ammunition storage area for 4 years and I worked on Sidewinder, HARM, and ATACMS missiles. This picture, the next picture I'm showing you, is a high-powered illuminator radar, the Hawk radar. When I first started working there, we were working on the stuff to maintain those radios, and it was working on there when I retired. The U.S. Army had gotten rid of them, but they were still selling them to the foreign military, and I was still working on them when I retired. I witnessed many upgrades to that radar. When I first started working on it, it was peanut solder-in vacuum tubes. Then it went to transistors, and later on it went to integrated circuits. It was a good radar. I don't know why our government decided to get rid of them. I guess because they didn't need them anymore after the Cold War. Next picture is a pulse acquisition radar. They got rid of those too. They got rid of the whole Hawk system. And then here's the Hawk missiles on top of the launcher. I fixed a lot of those launchers. And then what else is the next picture? And this is the inside of the battery control central. Fixed a lot of those. And here's it looking at it from the outside. I will show you some pictures of some of the test equipment, the test consoles that I worked with. This here is what was called the high frequency console, and they had that almost from the beginning, I think, of the Hawk system, and they were still using them when I left. We were using them to maintain foreign military equipment. That's what it looks like from a distance, and here's a little closer up picture of it. Yep, I knew that console like the back of my hand. I fixed it many times. I used it to repair the Hawk equipment. I had to repair the console too. I had to do both jobs. And the console I worked on most of the time, I don't have a picture for it. I wish I did. I had a picture of it back in the States, but I didn't bring it with me. It was the A22A. They called it the DTE, the A22A, the Raytheon console. DTE stood on the nameplate that was on the side of the console said dimensional test equipment. But all the people who talked about it, they always thought it meant the depot test equipment. But I'm just saying the Raytheon plate on the back side of it said dimensional test equipment. Anyway, it was our main Hawk test station. It had some good features and some very bad features. It was good because it was fast to operate and it was hardwired programmable by the patch board. The ones that I maintained and operated were the only thing that Raytheon provided updates for to match up the constant Hawk system updates. Those HFCs, they never updated them. You can still run some of the old Hawk stuff on it, but the new stuff had to run on the DTE. That was the good part. The bad part was that the console was poorly designed. It had an internal matrix composed of 124 mercury-wetted reed relays. These often went bad, like fuses, and would fail in either open or closed position. It only took one operator error or one miswired item to blow the matrix. I was both the operator and the repairman for the console, even though I only got paid for one of those jobs. I forgive them. It was hard work, but I enjoyed it. I loved my job. The next picture I'm showing you is of a Getz 1000 Patriot test console. It's not as good as it's cracked up to be. It's only as good as the programming. I still had to fix a lot of the Patriot stuff the old-fashioned way. I even made a manual version with no software that I called the PAT-1 Junior. I fixed a lot of Patriot power supplies the engineers and the programmers gave up on, because most new employees and most engineers and almost all supervisors don't know electronics at all. So this is the best that they have, and they try to do things with this thing, but it's, like I said, it's pretty limited when you consider that the people that are writing the programs don't really understand electronics. It's a bummer. Anyway, that's what they go with. And after a while, I got so fed up. But let me show you a couple more pictures before I tell you that story. This is a Patriot launcher with a missile coming out of it. I never saw a missile launched, you know. That's just a picture they took somewhere. But I worked on those launchers, on the parts of that launcher a lot. And here's the Patriot radar, you know, and I worked on that kind of stuff too. We worked on, there's a Patriot radar with a launcher sitting there back behind it. Fixed all that stuff for years and years. But after a while, I got so fed up with the liars and the thieves that I took a different job out in the ammunition storage area for 4 years. It was not pleasant out there. Snakes, ticks, and horseflies, no heat and no air conditioning. But I'll show you a picture of some of the missiles that I worked on. This is a Sidewinder missile. That's a heat-seeking missile that's fired from an airplane. I personally tested and repaired 3,000 of those guidance sections off of those Sidewinder missiles in the 4 years that I was out there. I also had to repair the test set quite frequently. Here's a picture of it being shot off an airplane. Well, I never saw one shot. I just worked on the live missiles, you know. Where we worked, they would always disconnect the guidance section from the warhead before I worked on electrically. But it was, you know, hopefully there was never any accidents there. So I think they did, safety-wise, they did well there. And here's a picture of the HARM missile, the high-speed anti-radiation missile. I like to tell the story that when I taught electronics from time to time for the government, and I taught electronics part-time for the vocational technical school also. But when I would have those foreign military students, like Jordanians, for example, I would tell them, if war breaks out, get away from the radar because you'll be the first target. That's the first missile that was shot in the Gulf Wars. Those HARM missiles, they take out the radars, no problem. They work really good. I tested probably hundreds of those too. I repaired their test set, and that was my job out there in the ammunition area. The one thing that I don't feel good about, but I had to work on it because you don't have any choice when you're told to do something, was these ATACMS missiles. Here's a picture of it here. The reason I didn't like that missile because it's an anti-personnel weapon. It's got like 450 cluster bombs inside of it. They used it in the Gulf War. I remember I'd install a GPS card in the test set one time, and it was in a different building than the other building I worked on out there in ammo. But I don't know. I just didn't like that. I don't mind. Maybe I wouldn't mind shooting down an enemy airplane, but when you're shooting a ballistic missile, a tactical ballistic missile at ground troops, I just don't think that's fair. God have mercy on us. War is a horrible thing. Anyway, praise God, I never went to war. I was in the Navy during Vietnam, but I never went to Vietnam. After the 4 years, I was ready to go back to my old job. There was much better conditions. So I retired and I went back to Building 370. Here's a picture of Building 370 looking down on it from the satellite. Okay, maybe that's enough.